demonetized already. And I clicked the wrong thing when I got going, which is just proof that I've already, whatever, man. Not that it matters anyways, because I don't want this chat stream to be the main event today. I have plenty of ESO to do, but there's also plenty of things to talk about here on November 26th, 2021, the 1-year anniversary of when I talked about 250,000 empty chairs at the table in a previous discussion on the whole Pandemi-Rant thing and stuff along those lines. What is up, everybody? This is Jay, aka MultimediaJay. Alerts are off. Matter of fact, I'm actually going to shut them off in OBS too, so even if this doesn't work, there's no way for any alerts to get to any of what I do right now. Alerts are off, and chat is in sub-only mode. Need to be subbed to the channel at least 5 minutes in order to say anything. Not that I'm going to be doing much with the chat anyways, and if it gets unruly, I'll just drop the chat from the stream replay, because you can do that on YouTube. So, not that it would anyways. I mean, my streams are pretty buried as it is. YouTube has been proving less and less interesting as a streaming platform if you actually want to grow an audience via being a streamer, as evidenced by at least recently being outed in the quarterlies that a lot of YouTube's hours watched is coming from big esports events. So a lot of the times when people take YouTube seriously as a streaming platform outside of the creator community, among the more mainstream audiences, happens for big events that were bringing an audience anyways. Whatever. So, Jay's Pandemi-Rants. I've had a playlist for this, and I just put it together last night. I was going to say I had a playlist for it for a while now, but yeah. So I've made something kind of just to see, how things have changed and how we've had to evolve and whatnot as the data and the science has caught up to everything that's going on. And this, ladies and gentlemen, will be no exception. It just got into the news, but I was already going to have this talk even without that being the case. I just actually decided to observe the Thanksgiving holiday properly and not do anything constructive on the channels on Thanksgiving. So basically, drinks at the ready. We're going to need them, as usual. But here's the situation. I call this one the winter of our pandemic discontent. And that is an inside joke relating to something my dad said after a particularly bad winter in the 90s. He took a bunch of pictures of all the snow and crap and how I had to keep digging out the cars and the mailbox and everything because we got a lot of snow that winter. And he sent it off to our Florida relatives for them to point and laugh like they always do. And then it's our turn when they're freaking out about hurricanes. But so my dad called that winter the winter of our discontent, and it was basically meant that the winter sucked more than usual. I mean, New England winters are a thing that can be things to grumble about, and in Connecticut, they can be even more of things to grumble about because we're mostly less than an hour from the ocean. So instead of getting just straight up snow and having to deal with snow all the time, we're more prone to freezing rain and other ice crap that is a lot trickier to deal with. I mean, you can buy snow tires, but you need studs in order to deal with ice, and there's legal restrictions on how long you can keep the studs on your tires. So before you have to take them off or get fined for causing too much wear and tear to the roads when it's not the wintertime. So yeah, straight up snow is easier to deal with. It's a pain in the neck to deal with anything, but straight up snow is easier to deal with than ice. So, but that's where the title of this chat stream gets its title from, is the winter of our discontent. Something my dad said about a particularly bad winter in the 90s, because I think that this winter, for even without the Omicron variant being on the scene, I think that this winter would actually be a notably bad winter, even without there being an Omicron variant that just popped up onto the screen. Trying to get the right angle with this webcam. It slides around easily, but that also means it gets off its case, really, because I don't really want to see the project area. I want it to be me, the Christmas tree, the November calendar, because I have the Christmas tree up on Black Friday, and just say our piece and move on with things. That's basically what it boils down to. I even have a new subscriber, but I'm not going to be talking about the new subscriber during this stream. We'll pick that up at the game streams when those continue. But, all right, so the winter of our pandemic discontent. Yeah, the latest discussion here. So a couple of things have happened since the last time we had one of these rants. So there is a children's vaccine available. So that loophole, so to speak, where the eligibility loophole has been closed. It's great to see that kids 5 and up now have the same tools available to fight this thing as their grown-up counterparts. And it just goes to show that if we had kept the schools closed, we would have only lost a semester. So, I mean, I don't think it was worth all that extra Delta spread to have the kids back in school for the fall semester when we could have just done spring semester starting in the middle of winter. Would have been weird for the kids. But what hasn't been weird during this pandemic? I mean, I think we should have had a children's vaccine available before we reopened the schools. But there's the political crap going on with the Biden administration. Oh, yeah, we're going to get everybody back to normal. That's one of the things that the Biden administration campaigned on. And so we keep seeing these moves where things are too soon, but nobody wants to talk about them because all the arguments on the internet are about the same 6 or 7 points because anti-vaxxers can't think up anything original. They just barf out what someone else told them. And that someone else that told them that thing is probably a scammer anyways. But if people had actually been using their brains, they would have noticed this pattern with President Biden's administration that they have this thing for getting a little too lenient too quickly. Great example. The big example, and probably the worst thing that's happened with COVID policy in 2021 that's going to impact how bad this winter is, by the way, was during the old guidance in May for the UK variant before Delta started ripping up the United States. When we told people, if you're vaccinated, you can take your masks off. That's going to go down, as far as I'm concerned, as one of the biggest mistakes in the pandemic. Not because there was no science behind someone who was vaccinated being well protected against the UK variant where they could take their mask off before Delta showed up. And I'm going to emphasize that all over the place because another thing anti-vaxxers like to do is fudge the details between the previous variants and Delta. And they'll probably do the same thing with Omicron as well. But the other issue, the big issue with the whole, you take your mask off thing, like I said back then, was that there's going to be people that are going to lie about their vaccination status because, oh, yeah, we're going to use the honor system to enforce it. The honor system is worthless when you have an entire chunk of the population that has literally been hating every single thing we've done to try to stop this virus. Everything. They hated masks. They hated lockdowns. They hate the vaccine. They're probably going to hate the Thor pill or the other therapeutics that the companies come out with. Except for, of course, the South, getting monoclonal antibodies all praised all over the place. Even though if you're worried about having a needle in you because of a vaccine, monoclonals are often administered via infusion. So you get to sit there with a tube and a needle going into you for a lot longer. And it's more expensive, too, by the way. And it's newer technology. I thought we were afraid of, and it's newer technology. And now we have to look at, its effectiveness in light of Omicron. If Omicron is similar to the last variant that popped out of South Africa, the beta variant, which was vaccine resistant. Yeah. The mRNA companies were working on, if you look at the global we don't need to talk about anti-vax bull crap, whatever. If you look at the Global Vaccine Alliance for the race to make COVID vaccines, who's at what stage in terms of phases and authorization, Moderna reported making at least one other vaccine to fight variants. That vaccine was originally made necessary because of the South African variant, or beta. Delta eclipsed it, but I'll bet any money there's renewed focus on a variant booster now that Omicron's on the scene, and Omicron should be factored into that. But yeah, the take your masks off thing, that's one of the big reasons why people don't wear masks now, because of the old outdated guidance not based on community transmission. And ever since the CDC tied everything to community transmission in almost all parts of the United States and almost all times, there's been higher substantial community transmission because Delta is what it is, and Omicron's going to apparently be even more of it. We'll have to see. We got to see how the data is so far, but scientists are very worried right now, and they have every right to be from what they're talking about with the various mutations that are people are already picking up the genomic sequencing and already looking at that kind of thing. But yes, the winter of our discontent, Omicron's going to just be the cherry on top of the garbage sundae, but even without that, because of what's been going on, there's going to be, because of what's been going on, the winter is already going to be worse than what it otherwise would be. Let's look at some maps here. Last time we looked at the COVID Act Now map, this is what we flashed at the beginning of the stream. The last time we looked at the COVID Act Now map, it was the middle of the southern outbreak, which unfortunately is how my cousin died, and the South was all red and lit up. Today, a lot of the misinformation is because of stuff like this. There we are. Risk levels. Everything's completely flipped around, and the South is doing better than the rest of the country. Don't be fooled, though. The South got torn up by Delta only a couple of months ago. Without vaccines, you're dependent upon however long the infection immunity lasts if you have a bunch of anti-vaxxers in your population. So, we do have a warning sign for that, and that is South Dakota. South Dakota, the governor of South Dakota, is scoring political points in among the American right for having never shut down her state. So South Dakota is the warning sign of what happens when you let this thing run rampant. It goes and does its thing. There was a time when South Dakota was competitive with Vermont in terms of low COVID numbers. However, if you looked at the number of deaths, South Dakota got there with a lot more people dying. And there was a time when South Dakota, along with Vermont, were some of the most competitive states in the country for containing the virus. But let's look at South Dakota directly. Infection rates. They had a dip for a while. The thing is, we know that vaccine immunity wanes. And that is something that is engineerable, manufacturable, and controllable in almost all cases, with a few wildcard exceptions, like if someone's immunocompromised or something. Infection immunity, it's dependent upon how severe your symptoms were. See, that's interesting. I think a lot of people would really benefit from learning how vaccines are considered useful in the first place, and that is the immune response that they generate. If you go through the Global Vaccine Alliance and look at the discontinued trials of COVID shots, you'll find there are ones that failed specifically because they didn't mount enough of an immune response versus getting the actual virus. So they were weak and ineffective and never made it to market. That applies to, if you had like just a mild case and you're like, oh, I'm protected now, I have antibodies. No, you don't know. And that's the wild card it's very unreliable, as we see here. So, okay, they have their big winter surge a little bit more afterwards, and then things warm up and everything. And South Dakota is one of the best states in the country. And then it stops. Of course, yeah, things got colder again. People got forced indoors and stuff like that. But what this serves as is a warning that the good numbers in the South will not last. And it leads to a very legitimate thing to think about when it comes to whether or not you get vaccinated for COVID. Here's the thing. When something like a new variant pops up or the protection from the vaccine regimen starts to wane, you authorize a booster, go get it, and that's that. What are you going to do if you don't want to get vaccinated? Cross your fingers and hope the virus doesn't kick your ass this time when you get it again? So that's the issue. That's the logistical issue with anti-vaxxer nonsense running states. Let me give you an example locally. A lot of the towns in my area have about 15,000 people. Some of the worst towns for COVID are like 50 cases on average a day. Do the math on that. 50 times 7 is 5, 7, 35. Add a 0. 350 cases. Shoot, open up the calculator for the next part. 350 cases a week in a town with 15,000. 350 average cases a week in a town with 15,000 residents, minus vaccines driving those numbers down. If COVID is left to run amok, it'll take about 43 weeks for it to infect the entire population. Divide by 4, how many months is that? 10 months. So we know that the engineered, fixed vaccine-induced immunity, less variable, vaccine-induced immunity starts to wane by the 6-month mark. What do you think happens if we're constantly hoping that infection immunity is good enough? There's always people who are coming up short. It never stops. There's always new marks to infect or reinfect. And that's the thing we'll have to keep an eye on with the Omicron variant as well, is how much that reinfection thing is a problem with it. Truth of the matter is, we developed vaccine technology for a reason, because it gives us more control over these situations instead of crossing our fingers and playing the odds. But don't tell that to the people in states that have with all this crap going on. I'll just leave it on screen here. South Dakota, there's the dip, and now their progress has been undone, and it's been persistently undone ever since. What are they at for vaccinations? Only 54% fully vaccinated. We know that Delta, never mind what Omicron can do. We don't know that yet. We're waiting for the numbers and the science to come back on that. But we know that Delta was more important in terms of you getting all your shots. And that gets to probably one of the other issues we got to talk about with all of this. Probably going through what I want to talk about, but not in the order I wanted to talk about it in. Let's talk about Connecticut. Connecticut, one of the best states in the country for managing the pandemic. All of New England has turned red except for Connecticut, the one gold state left in New England. So 83.3% with one dose. We got the I-95 corridor is very well covered. Everywhere else is catching up. So you have all these counties here. The problem is, if you look at nationally, who has the highest infection rate? Where is the virus making the most grounds right now? Northern Marianas Islands, 1.77. They only have 108,000 people, though, so their numbers will swing more wildly because the population's lower. This is something that anti-vaxxers flip out about. Oh, one person puts us into the red. Yes. If you're talking about a small island chain in the Pacific with 108,000 total people, you shouldn't be having cases versus Massachusetts with nearly 7 million, or New York with New York City having been a previous center of all of this. 20 million people in the state of New York, and just sort by population. California with nearly 40 million people. Texas with 30 mil. Florida with 21.5 mil. Of course, the geographic area is similar in size. But that's the thing. If you're further out in the woods, you should not be having problems because there's more space, there's more baked in social distancing. So it's an event if there is a case, if there are a certain decent number of cases, and it's definitely an event if a lesser populated area keeps up with a more densely populated area in terms of cases. Now, let's look at these numbers here. Puerto Rico managing things very well with 84% at least one dose. 74% fully vaccinated, but they're an island. I mean, once you get to the point where you've clamped everything down internally, now it's a matter of controlling your borders, which is why Republicans should be jumping all over this vaccination thing, because when you get, if we clamp things down internally enough, then we could be like, oh yeah, let's go nuts about the borders, keep this thing out. And that should be right up their alley. But in terms of the least amount of cases per 100,000 residents, New England has been knocked out of the top 10. So yeah, there we go. You have to keep scrolling to start seeing Connecticut, Massachusetts, Rhode Island. Yeah, so what happened? This is part of what's going on that is the reason why, if you're unvaccinated, things are going to be pretty ugly, because things are worse than they could be right now. Let's take Connecticut, for example, the state I'm most familiar with. 83.3% at least one dose. Really high numbers, right? Except we know that Delta is more, we know just Delta, never mind Omicron, whatever that does. We know that just through Delta, that what matters is the fully vaccinated number. And that's hovering around 70%. So 30%, grab the calculator here, 30%, Connecticut with 3.5 million people times 0.3 leaves 1 million of those 1 million and change of those 3.5 million still unvaccinated, sitting ducks to the virus. People whose immune systems will have less of a clue what to do with this thing, and therefore more of a chance to have higher viral loads that cause them to be contagious for longer and spread things around more. When President Biden and the CDC folks call it a pandemic of the unvaccinated, that's what they're talking about. Because if your immune system doesn't know how to handle this thing, you're going to be contagious for longer, or in some cases, you're going to be contagious at all. So you have 1 million out of the 3.5 million people, roughly, who are still sitting ducks to this thing. And if they're around people who are vaccinated, but the immunity has waned because it's been like 6 months or so since their last dose and they're eligible for the booster and haven't gotten it yet, you're talking about people that'll be causing breakthrough infections or more likely to cause them. So it's all a crapshoot with regards to where the virus being essentially, like we talked about last time, a criminal of opportunity. Like those times when people get their cars broken into because they left their doors unlocked, and the police chiefs going on local news and radio saying, hey, come on, fellas, lock your doors and this crap won't happen. People are looking for the easy thing, and you're giving it to them. Not those exact words, but that's the attitude anyways. But yeah, so highly vaccinated state like Connecticut. Oh, how come our numbers are rising? Because 30% of the population is still sitting ducks to this thing. And you got to keep an eye on the math that's involved, and the numbers that are involved, no matter how much numbers hurt your head. When we say that New England is more highly vaccinated than the rest of the country, that's versus like southern states that can barely crack 50%, at least, well, not southern. I think some of the Midwestern states are in that boat now. But among some of the least vaccinated, let's go back to it. Among some of the least vaccinated states in the country, what are we looking at for numbers here? Wyoming, 53% at least one dose. 45%. So the majority of the population is still more likely to be the COVID equivalent of a rabid dog, so to speak, and spread this around and drive people crazy. So when we say that New England is doing better than the rest of the country, we're talking about New England doing better than states with these kinds of numbers. So states that are just the boat anchor of our progress as a country. So when we're talking about, in terms of most vaccinated, we got Massachusetts there with 7 million people, 85% at least one dose, but only 71% fully vaccinated. Now, here's the other thing, too. If we go back to Connecticut, you're talking 1 million people possibly spreading this stuff around. Here's the thing, though. 71.7% meeting the federal definition of fully vaccinated, meaning they had 2 doses. But Connecticut's vaccine rollout was in 2 phases, so to speak. Well, not really. There were other phases as well, but 2 general ways of doing things. First, there was the high-risk groups in certain occupations had early access to the vaccine before it was made generally available by May. But even if you were among the people who first became eligible in May, June, July, August, September, October, November, you're coming up on being due for your booster with a 6-month timetable if you were vaccinated in May. Of course, I went out and got mine because between medical conditions and my job, I was considered high risk. So I was able to be, have the booster up to 100% by Thanksgiving. A lot of people in the country, especially people that weren't nerding it out on the CDC website and paying attention to the conditions for being considered high risk and finding out that your job could make you high risk, even if your medical history doesn't. The people that weren't nerding it out the people that weren't nerding out those kinds of things could have 6-month-old shots not be boosted properly, more prone to breakthroughs. There's one person I know of who just got over COVID despite being vaccinated. He was knocked out of work for 2 weeks with a breakthrough infection. He's over 50. He was vaccinated before the general availability date in the month of May. So he's at 6 months plus. He didn't end up in the hospital, but he still had symptomatic illness that knocked him out of work for 2 weeks because he had to quarantine until he could be cleared to return to work. Now, since he tested positive, I don't know if there might have been some unemployment he could have collected or short-term disability. But I can tell you with the company's short-term disability with the 9-to-5ers, that's like 60% of what you make, I think. So it's just like unemployment. You lose a chunk of your paychecks when you're out on disability. So you're talking lost money when you don't continue working, even though you're still getting something. And that's the part of this that is the big reason why I have these rants, is that people talk about, oh, yeah, you're vaccinated. What do you have to worry about? A lot of people, even people that are fully vaccinated, have to worry about money, the money side of this. Because you can be fully vaccinated, you're not going to end up in the hospital or anything, but you're still required to quarantine if you show symptoms at work. So it could be the case that you get Delta sniffles, so to speak, but you still lose money because of it. That's the thing. And so when anti-vaxxers screech about, oh, you should be thinking you're all set. Anybody who has thought through the situation as to what it's going to entail if someone gets them a breakthrough infection or anything else, really, it doesn't even need to be a breakthrough infection. Literally anything that shares symptoms with COVID and is on the little list is something you're supposed to stop coming to work over. So you can have something, you can come down with a regular cold and it knocks you out of work because of all this crap that's going on. So, I mean, the longer this pandemic stuff has to keep going, the more it puts people at risk, including people that are vaccinated, if not because of health, definitely because of money. Think about it right now, especially with the government having dropped the ball on approving boosters for all adults until Thanksgiving, which means Thanksgiving and Black Friday, this is going to be an issue. all the socialization at holiday parties for about a week or two, assuming people don't race out and get their booster right now. No. So we might have a dent put in this by Christmas and New Year's. But this booster thing, first of all, and then we got to see what Omicron's going to do. This booster thing where it stayed high risk only, and people didn't understand that their jobs can make them high risk, even if their medical history doesn't, and they could have been eligible for a booster before the official eligibility date. Because if you're now, between all of this, we have a situation where the winter is worse than it otherwise would be so far. And for the unvaccinated, who are more prone to getting clobbered by this thing, it's even worse than that. Well, what about people that have antibodies? Well, we know that, since we know that vaccine immunity wanes, that makes infection immunity even more of a random thing that you really don't want to be crossing your fingers and counting on, if you can help it. So, yeah, garbage winter. But the important thing to remember with these numbers here, this 71.7% includes people who meet the federal definition of being fully vaccinated, which could mean somebody who got dose 2 6 months or more ago. So this number being high doesn't tell the whole story in terms of what it's going to be like in terms of breakthrough infections. Of course, there are local numbers on breakthrough infections for hospitalizations in Connecticut. Keeping an eye on that for the past couple of weeks, the majority of people in the hospital are still not fully vaccinated. There is an uptick in breakthroughs because of this lapse in the vaccine coverage. But then we have to ask about our status versus the rest of the world. And what the WHO is probably going to be hawking on with this Omicron thing. Just because rich countries can roll out robust vaccination programs does not mean we can't ignore the rest of the world. Because anywhere this thing can go around is where it's going to mutate and potentially form the next big variant that causes problems and evades vaccines. In South Africa, for example, the beta variant had vaccine resistance. It's one of the things that drove mRNA companies to start working on additional products to use as boosters. Now we see Omicron sounding alarms that might be doing the same thing as beta. Fortunately, beta was beaten out by Delta in terms of being able to spread. But Delta still did damage. And don't forget, every single variant, including the UK variant, was some kind of upgrade over the original virus that the vaccines were developed for. We're fortunate that the vaccines retained efficacy versus newer variants. We'll have to see what happens with Omicron with the mutations that it has. But I think at this point, you got to start thinking about things in terms of this winter. Suppose you're unvaccinated. Forget Omicron, although it's even worse for you now. Just Delta alone will have made this winter worse than last winter. And we've kind of been talking all over the place, but let's try and rein things in a bit. And let's bring the maps back up and let's talk about why this is such a big deal, especially if you don't have your shots yet. And definitely the reason why you should definitely get them ASAP. At this point, you're basically being left behind if you're not vaccinated. So, assuming Omicron isn't bad enough to require lockdowns again, the current dominant variants in the United States, a couple of states with no data for some reason. I'm going to have to check out and see what's going on with their collection methodologies here. But 70% of the entire U.S. population versus the census population is at 1+ doses. So, absent a new threat from Omicron, if President Biden orders any kind of lockdowns or supports any kind of old school 2020 response things, he would be doing so when the majority of the U.S. population has at least one dose, and a substantial one at that. And this number is only going to keep going up as more children get vaccinated in families that want to vaccinate their kids. So people are like, oh yeah, here we go. Cases are ticking up. There's going to be lockdowns. At the federal level, if you watch the CDC's meetings on the updates with Dr. Fauci and Dr. Walensky, one of the folks at the press part of it was like, hey, are you going to think about lockdowns again? Europe's doing it. And they're like, no, we don't support it. We have the tools available to fight this thing. And this is, by the way, is the political stuff that I was talking about earlier with the Biden administration. The Biden administration gains political points. So when we talk about how, Governor DeSantis is trying to gain political points in Florida by opposing everything we try to do to stop the virus, that kind of crap, like with the ban on mandates and other stuff that Florida's doing, all that other wacko stuff. But on the other side of the spectrum, President Biden and his entire administration, it gains political points from anything that could be considered a return to normal, including a Thanksgiving and a Christmas where there aren't the restrictions that there were last year. And it makes perfect sense. Bottom line is the vaccine is a commodity in this country now. You can wander into a pharmacy and get started on your doses with walk-ins now. I think the boosters will eventually get there too. And then we'll have to see, what kind of supply chain rollout there is, what kind of vaccine rollout we need or booster rollout we need if we make something that fights Omicron, which, by the way, I predict that the mRNA companies will come out with something first. Pfizer and Moderna will beat the others to market because mRNA has faster logistics than older technologies with making vaccines. So, assuming, before we see any real threat what Omicron's going to do to the country, the current state versus Delta is that, look, the vaccine has made the rounds. It's available. You can wander into a Walmart and get it. So, it's not hard to get going on things. There's really no reason to go back to old school 2020 ways of doing things. And going back to Connecticut once again, this is something that locally I see a lot of the anti-vaxxers conveniently forgetting when they screech about stuff on social media. So here, let me just tell you something. Oh, what about the numbers? They're going up. Well, we know, for example, that there are issues with what's considered fully vaccinated if someone got their second dose over 6 months ago and hasn't gotten a booster yet. There was also the logistical hurdle in getting the boosters authorized for all adults, not just people in high-risk settings, of which we know the general public wasn't too familiar with what constituted a high-risk setting, since the psyche of the general public was like, oh, well, if I don't have any medical conditions, I should be fine, right? And some of what the CDC and the FDA were saying, what those folks were saying could be construed as such. The truth of the matter is, though, if you actually looked at the guidelines for high risk, your job and the list of occupations was not all inclusive, deliberately stated as so. If you had a job where you dealt with a lot of people or you were potentially exposed a lot, you could be considered high risk, even if it wasn't one of the things on the list. And overall, when I have my GP's office telling me, yeah, just go to a pharmacy, they're not all that strict about the whole booster eligibility thing anyways. That just reduced it down to, I don't want to take an appointment that an old lady who needs her shots could have taken. So I picked a Walgreens that had several open appointments, and I made the appointment same day. Of course, you could say that because I'm a night shift guy, and I make the appointment at like 3 in the morning and show up at 2 in the afternoon after I've gotten some sleep. I gave a darn about my neighbor, but it was pretty humbling, though, to sit there waiting for a booster dose, when you had like old folks in wheelchairs and other folks, who were immunocompromised going for theirs too. But that's one of the reasons why I went specifically looking for a place with a lot of surplus appointments. So, but hey, it all boils down to the way that the pharmacies and their managers and stuff run their operations. In the United States, doesn't have any shortage of vaccines anywhere. There might be anti-vaxxers who are trying to get to book bogus appointments to deny people access to the vaccine like they did last time in certain parts of the country. But for the most part, the United States does not have a supply problem, and we're lucky to be in this position. Especially when you consider like the case with Delta in India, with companies like Bharat Biotech and other Indian companies manufacturing viral vector vaccines and other vaccines with older technologies that are slower to manufacture because of the logistics involved and stuff like that. And it slowed down the vaccine rollout because high population, older technology, which is why I agree with the president and the WHO that there needs to be some kind of either waiver or licensing so that mRNA shots can be manufactured locally or regionally instead of having to ship them all around the world, driving up the cost of goods sold through the transportation and handling costs, and making it to where developing countries can't afford doses. So it shouldn't be, as we've seen, though, with what happened in South Africa. We can't ignore the rest of the world. We are at war with this thing worldwide. We need to treat it as such. It isn't like, oh, get the U.S. all set, get EU all set, get Asia all set, and get Israel all set, and we're all set. No, it's not the way it works. But anyways. So, yeah, this number has its issues. We know that. The booster thing as well had some hiccups as well. So things are worse than they otherwise would be for even, as well as the remaining unvaccinated out there. Now consider this. No mask mandate like there was last year. People misinterpreting the old guidance, or people who are vaccinated over 6 months ago that are more at risk of a breakthrough infection, going by the old guidance and not wearing their masks because they're vaccinated, because the honor system never worked. It left the door open for people to lie about their vaccination status or in some other way get out of being held accountable for it. And companies and businesses were more interested in selling stuff than policing people's vaccination status when they went through the door. It even made its way into official documents, like, for example, Walmart folks talking about how they were encouraging their workforce to get vaccinated instead of going crazy about whether everybody in their store was vaccinated or not, or using a vaccine passport. Because, you know, if you have a chunk of the population that can't buy stuff, that's sales you lose to whoever will actually sell stuff to anti-vaxxers or vaccine hesitant folks. So there's a lot that's different, even without Omicron being on the scene. There's a lot already just from the way things are now versus the way they are a year ago, with the vaccine having made the rounds and governments being the government folks around here being less interested in looking like we're taking a step backwards by going back to old 2020 methods of doing things like lockdowns. And that's probably going to cause problems if Omicron turns out to be something that requires another booster. When it comes to the U.S., there's going to be political pressure to keep things as normal as possible, because that's what the Biden administration scores points on, is making progress in the pandemic. Anything that looks like a step backwards is going to be politically unpopular. And we all know from what's been going on in this country that there can be a difference between science and politics, and a big difference that costs lives. And I would know this, and my family would know this, because we had empty seats at our Thanksgiving tables this year. We talked about 250,000 empty chairs at the table last year, but this year, my family was part of that. One of my aunts is widowed because of COVID. Her husband got it and died from it because of that situation the experts were warning about, where somebody who survives it gives it to someone who's medically vulnerable and they die from it. My cousin passed away around Labor Day after spending the last month and a half of his life hooked up to machines in the hospital. He got it from his wife, who was an angry anti-vaxxer and lived in Florida, where there was a lot of anti-vax nonsense in the general culture of the area. Exactly the situation the experts were warning about. Someone who survives COVID, my cousin's widow, giving it to someone who is medically vulnerable, my cousin, who died at 41 from it. This isn't some childhood thing where you don't like the facts, so you get to make up little stories to wish away that thing that hurts your feelings. This thing's a cold-blooded killer. We need to approach it as though we're at war with an enemy of this country, because again, this thing is an enemy of our civilization and everything. It's an enemy of our way of life. The United States, we fought a global war on terror because terrorists based out of, rogue countries or whatever, were responsible for the 9/11 attacks and other threats to our way of life. That was the thing. That was the recruitment driver. Join the army in the 2000s because you'd be fighting for freedom. Because bad people out there wanted to destroy our way of life. That was what our folks were told when they signed up for the military. GWOT, Global War on Terror. There's bad people out there who don't like our way of life and want to fight against it, so we need to fight back. That attitude is completely gone when it goes from a people enemy to a microscopic enemy. Some of the supply chain nonsense we've had is because of workers being out due to COVID. And then in other parts of the world with less access to vaccines, where plants have to shut down and everything, and that impacts everything downstream, which causes problems for our supply chains. There's a lot of COVID involved in a lot of the nonsense we're dealing with supply chains and stuff, and things being overpriced, and all kinds of other stuff that we're dealing with right now. Same thing with some of the inflation going on. And of course, good old-fashioned capitalism with companies profiteering off of how much they can raise the prices and blame it on inflation. It's a market elasticity. If people feel like they can't replace a product, a good or service with something else, you have more flexibility with your pricing. So some of that going on too that I'm unfortunately familiar with as a business school grad. But this virus is a threat to our way of life, just like the terrorists were in GWOT. We should be no quarter not giving aid and comfort to the enemy with this thing any more than we might have, been sympathetic to terrorists 20 years ago. Don't do it. If you like our way of life, you're going to join the right side in this whole mess, the side that wants to fight the virus and not give up. Like those journalists that are making it look like New Zealand has given up because they're not going wild with lockdowns anymore to try and go for zero COVID. Well, where were the vaccines in New Zealand? Where were they? And why exactly was the Prime Minister of New Zealand so stuck in 2020 that she was still going wild with lockdowns as the vaccine even made its way to the export markets? So that's something for New Zealand to figure out on its own. What? Yeah, so this winter, by design, even without Omicron, is going to be worse than last year because of political factors involved, because of science that's involved, because of waning immunity and vaccine immunity and people's bad attitudes and ideas in general. Someone who, maybe they're a teacher in the state of Connecticut that was in one of the last groups to be vaccinated ahead of the line. So they have over 6-month-old shot. They don't get a booster in time. And don't forget, you're talking shots have a 2-week ramp-up period. The virus has an incubation period of about a week or so. So you're talking it's very possible to get infected right after you get the shot and not have the shot be 100% and feel like an idiot because of that. Multiply this even further if you're unvaccinated at this point. If you are, why the heck are you? And quite frankly, let me just call out WTNH, the Connecticut news outlet that decided to make a special feature called Faces of the Unvaccinated, making people who don't want to get the shot into TV stars. Look, you've been surrounded by guinea pigs for better part of a year now. I'd say at this point, if you're still waiting, you just want to wait forever. So I have nothing to say to you. Because I got news for you. People who believe in science and medicine are sick of this thing too. You can talk to any of my friends who work in healthcare about that. They'll gladly tell you how they're sick of taking care of patients who listen to nonsense on the internet and didn't get their shots. They're sick of all the preventable stuff that's stressing them out and putting them at risk. You can go to Reddit and check the subreddits for medical professionals, nurses, etc., and see people that are exasperated with why they're still dealing with this stuff when we've had a vaccine for nearly a year because of people believing rumors on the internet instead of actually listening to people who have a very compelling interest in knowing what the heck they're talking about. Let me just bring this up once again, the what if that really matters for the people that listen to a lot of conspiracy crap. Sometimes if you want to see just how ridiculous a conspiracy theory is, just assume that it's right and, don't 100% blind faith style. So let's suppose there are some conspiracy people saying that all the vaccinated people in the United States are going to die in the next couple of years because of the vaccine. If that's true, we're looking at, with 70% of the U.S. population with at least one dose, we're looking at an extinction level event that will crash the economy, drive entire sections of the country into either being abandoned or civil chaos. And it would be a disaster that no politician or political party, for that matter, would want to be the ones that owned it. No politician in their right mind is going to want something like this, or even have their party associated with stuff like this. So you better be darn sure. You better be darn sure that you bet that they would have to be darn sure before they recommended something like this. That's why we have experts working in the government. So think about it. A United States with only 30% of its population remaining. First, the logistics of all those funerals. So who's buried, who's cremated, the backlog that causes. Then let's talk about, do you have enough people left to run the power plants? Do you have enough people left to have police, fire, EMTs, construction workers? Where do you have the shortages of people now? Because people don't just appear as adults out of nowhere. You're going to have to build the population back up over the next 30 years. And have lots of kids and raise all those kids in an environment where there's less people running things. So you'd need a massive baby boom, but you'd have a lot less adults to, manage everything while you're raising all those kids. So if you really think about what happens if these tinfoil heads are right, it becomes exactly the sort of thing that no politician or political party in their right mind would want to have to take ownership of if that were the case. So you better be darn sure it doesn't happen, or it's not going to happen. So, did I even say everything I wanted to say in this chat stream? Probably not. The bottom line is, though, this winter by design will be worse than the last one, especially if you're not vaccinated. So end this nonsense and go get your shots. Because forget Omicron. We'll figure out what the deal is going to be with Omicron in a couple of weeks. But just now with Delta alone and the logistical bump, the logistical hiccup in the boosters in the United States, things are already worse than they otherwise would be. Now we have to see if we have situations where someone got 2 doses, breakthrough infection because of the booster hiccup, and now they think, oh, I guess this didn't work, I won't get another one. So the idea of, we're 70% fully vaccinated, the longer this goes on, the more complicated that number is going to get. And the less cut and dry the results are going to be from it. Unless we change the definition of fully vaccinated to include being current with boosters or anything that's available, then that throws the numbers way off. People are going to be like, oh, look, the numbers are all over the place. That means they must be wrong. See how this goes? This is literally obstruction nonsense. Anti-vaxxers, we already know they win with different victory conditions. They don't have to convince you that they're right. They just have to sow enough fear, uncertainty, and doubt in you that you don't get vaccinated, that your kids don't get vaccinated, that literally anybody else doesn't get vaccinated. And then we see it get to the point where there's enough vaccine in circulation, even though it's less effective over time. There's enough in circulation that the unvaccinated breakouts we see are going to be in groups of people. They're probably angry at the government. They probably all have similar friends, or they have similar, other folks as well who are prone to breakthrough infections or whatever it is. People that aren't on top of this, because people on the other side of this aren't going to associate with them. So you have a situation where where it's more likely that we see cases break out in chunks because it's happening in the parts and the demographics that are still the most prone to it. But then that gets to be used as fodder, like, yeah, see, it didn't work. Even though hoping that people aren't going to be smart enough to do the math on the numbers that are involved and figure out that it's more than possible for them to be a stick in the mud and run out the clock and win. That's pathetic, but it's the way life is. Life doesn't always go the way we want it to, including the way other people act. You have to be smart enough to see past the nonsense and realize when people are trying to sell you a bag of goods like this. Seriously. Think about it this way. Let's talk about the running out the clock thing, which is probably the most important thing. You screech and holler about how you're not going to get vaccinated until the efficacy starts to wane. Then you can say, look, see, it didn't work. See, da-da-da. And you just continue your all emotions, no facts, all emotions, no brains tirade until you get your way. Unless you don't. Who gains from people sitting on their ass not doing the right thing? The other side. Who gains from scaring people away from stuff that the numbers are showing is working? They do. At a time when their percentage of the population is shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. It's like I said last time with the cat backed into the corner. The more they're backed into the corner, the more they ruffle their fur, the more they get angry, the more like, wow, and stuff like that. No, it just gets worse until it gets better. And for these people that want to run out the clock, it literally gets worse until it gets better, because they start winning when other people start screwing up and not doing the right thing. So, okay, yeah. Parents got vaccinated, scare them out of vaccinating their kids. Hey, by the way, the vector for some of the outs that we've been dealing with the 9-to-5ers is people whose kids brought it home from school and gave it to the parents because the parents weren't vaccinated, or it was a breakthrough because the parents were vaccinated a long time ago. See what I mean? You have an entire group of people in this mess that gains from doing nothing and getting others to do likewise, that gains from being a stick in the mud, that gains from being petulant children about it. You know what I'm talking about, right? The bratty kid in the store that stops listening to mommy because they don't like something that's going on. And so they completely clam up, They just say, Get the mouth in the shot. Like that. That's probably not a very good impression of it because I haven't been that age in an extremely long time. But you know what? You'll know when you see them, because the parents will be talking to the kids will be ignoring them, standing there. Come on, come with mommy, come with mommy, come with daddy, come on, let's go. The kid does nothing. Then they have to drag them out physically, and they scream like crazy to get as much attention as possible because they know that other people are going to be sympathetic. Oh, don't treat your kid like that. How can you do that? Oh, And then there's some smarter parents that'll be like, yeah, brat deserves it. Show some discipline because you're the adult. Now, but that's the grown-up version of that is what we're dealing with. You have people who benefit from running out the clock. You have people who benefit from being sticks in the mud. And they have no reason to change. So we can't be catering to these people. I say, I'm not here to try and convince any of those people to get vaccinated because they've already decided they're not going to. And quite frankly, I consider them the enemy because of that. You want to sympathize with the virus? As far as I'm concerned, you're on the virus's side. I don't care. I'm here for the people that are still wondering about stuff. So when they see things get bad this winter, whether from Omicron or from Delta making the rounds and anywhere it can go, including people that are vaccinated that don't get the boosters, when they see this going on, they'll know that someone was here to call it out. And now, how about we talk about the long-term element of this? We mentioned it earlier, but just to go over it one more time in full detail. There's two ways that you can respond to this thing. Preventative, proactive or reactive. The vaccine is proactive. And we know it's cost-effective because of what because of what, the government is billing things for. $40 for a set of 2 doses plus whatever it is for the booster. I don't know. Versus $2,100 for a monoclonal treatment. And hey, what do you know? The governor of Florida has some compelling interest in helping one of the biggest companies involved in selling monoclonals. Boy, will that be fun politically when he runs for re-election. And then of course the Thor pill from Merck, which should receive some emergency authorization. What does that cost? But there's one fundamental problem with waiting to get sick before doing anything about this. Number one, you're going to get sick. Number two, it's a race against the clock because many of these medications need to be administered ASAP before symptoms progress to where you can get hospitalized, to where you need to be hospitalized. So question is, do you want to be racing against the clock at a time when you're feeling worse and worse because this thing got to you? I'd rather go vaccine first before all of that stuff. Especially since we know we have mRNA technology, which is flexible enough that we can modify it to deal with new variants. And this really is, I don't know why I should keep having discussions about this stuff on my channel when we can talk about this one thing. The proactive reactive thing, the most important part of that, though, is how you deal with all of this as this situation evolves, as the pandemic continues. So you run into a situation where the protection from the vaccine starts to wane. Get a booster. Have a few more days of Moderna arm, like I did. Soreness, itchiness, a little bit here and there. Nothing I haven't been through before, and I probably jinxed myself, by the way, by having a tetanus booster before I did any COVID shots, because I was due for that too earlier in the year. So you have that. It's simple. You know you're going to get a sore arm or whatever. If you didn't have the severe reaction to the vaccines, the first time or so, you pretty much know what to expect, which is why you get monitored after you get these things, so people can take action in case you're one of the rare people who has a rare extreme side effect. Oh, and don't forget, anything the vaccine can rarely do to you, the virus probably does more commonly. Take heart trouble, for example. There's heart problems involved in a quarter of hospitalizations. And before we had a vaccine, we had situations like in Massachusetts where this thing was giving people strokes in their 30s because of blood clots. Literally everything that people have made a big to-do about in terms of potential rare vaccine side effects, the virus does more of, and it does it worse. And you have long haulers to think about as well. Some of whom probably wish they had the vaccine and everything when because they got sick before it became available. But if you're vaccinated and you believe in science and you follow the science and you follow the recommendations of health professionals, who, by the way, lost a significant chunk of their young life to get certified in the first place. Doctors go to school for 8 years plus residency. I mean, you're talking about like throwing away a chunk of your life just to be able to be a doctor. And then you have to put up with people believing rumors spread about by angry stump grinders on the internet who listen to somebody else and they're just repeating what someone else said that's wrong in the first place. Or people that don't know how to handle data, or people that don't know how to handle logical fallacies, or people that don't know how to handle when people try to scam them. They don't know how to think critically, and they don't know how to bypass all the propaganda and go straight to the hard numbers on the matter. But hey, pooled ignorance does damage. Anyways, over the long run, as the situation changes, you're vaccinated, okay, you get another dose. You have some more side effects. Wow. If you are doing things via natural immunity, you have to get infected again. Then what variant is it going to be? How severe are your symptoms? Because the severity of the symptoms ties in with the immune response to it. So how severe are your symptoms going to be? What kind of response did your body mount to it? The immune response that is generated by something is how we judge whether vaccines are effective or not. So get the vaccines out of the picture. Now you got to talk about the immune response that was generated from the infection you had. It's less known, it's less studied, it's less certain, it's less understood. It's more random. It's more of cross your fingers and hope it doesn't kick your ass. So, fundamentally, we can come up with timetables for boosters and stuff and things like that. The other side doesn't have that luxury. And so we see situations like South Dakota appearing to do well after the virus tore up the state and their numbers were really low because the thing ran out of bodies. Sorry to be so morbid, but that's the way it works for these dumb things. Ran out of new people to infect. So things dropped off that way for a while. But depending upon how severe people got, what kind of immune response was involved, the infection immunity started wearing off in certain people before others, opening up more targets to the virus again. So now you see South Dakota persistently red. That's what's going to happen with the South, by the way. And the sad part is that when this happens, you bump it out a few more months to when this really starts becoming a problem in the South again. It's going to be when things are warming up. So that gives a perfect excuse for people to say it's because the weather's getting warmer. When in reality, the South Dakota version of this happened when things got colder. Are we going to keep using seasons as an excuse for stuff that has other explanations? Oh yeah, New England's getting hit harder. New England's getting hit again because it's colder out. But why is Arizona and New Mexico part of the problem? It's the desert. Still gets hot during the day. Gets cold at night because it's dry. But why are Arizona and New Mexico part of the problem? Well, let's just put it back on. Let's put COVID now back on screen. And important thing to remember with that, let's just link the browsers again and put the risk charts back up there. So if you remember 6 months ago, will it come back up? Yes, it will. So if you remember 6 months ago, when the South was getting torn up by this thing, there was a lot of blood states in the South, what Michigan is right now. With the same thing happening in the more vaccinated northern states, you see only regular red. You don't see a bunch of blood stains. Minnesota was blood red the other day. It's back to just being red again due to a drop in cases per 100K, etc. But you saw persistent blood red across the South with less vaccines and stuff like that, and bad attitudes towards vaccines when the South was getting torn up. So you want to see the effectiveness of the vaccines. And now keep an eye on the North, especially the Northeast and New England. Because now that boosters are approved for all ages, or not all, for all groups, not just high risk, 18 plus, at least 6 months since your last dose, you're going to see New England clamp down and not get as bad as the South was during the worst of it. Meanwhile, the propaganda is going to go around that, look, the South is open, it's doing great, because the South is the new South Dakota. And we already saw what happened to South Dakota after it had good numbers for a long time because the virus ran out of new hosts and people had infection immunity for a while. Not to say there aren't any vaccinations in South Dakota. I mean, they have managed to get to 66.3, at least one dose, 54% fully vaccinated, so coin toss. And also, don't forget, the state numbers for vaccination can be driven up by built-up areas. You look at all these counties that have less coverage relative to Jones County. Is that where the capital is? No. This is exactly what happened in Florida. Florida had a ton of vaccines around Miami, garbage numbers everywhere else until Delta tore up the state, and till Delta tore up the state, and there were people in Florida that freaked out when there was virus stuff everywhere, and they went and got vaccinated. So, like we talked about last time, Bible talks about people getting saved as though escaping through the flames. The secular version of that is people see that the virus really is a big deal. They go get vaccinated. That happens, you know. But that's the thing to watch for as this continues. The North not get hit. The Northeast, New England, not hit as hard, even though the numbers ticked up. The South, meanwhile, will enjoy a winter of, bragging that, oh, look, we're doing better, until the infection immunity from getting shredded by Delta a couple of months ago starts waning in large numbers, and people are like, oh, I'm not getting the shot. There's nothing to replace it with. So the cycle continues, so the nonsense continues until people decide to smarten up about all of this. And so, we see what happened in South Africa can happen pretty much anywhere. Let the stupid thing replicate enough, it eventually evolves and mutates. Evolution, ladies and gentlemen. So, yeah, but let's stop blaming the weather, because there's colder parts of the country. Put it back on the screen. The Pacific Northwest, still orange. Nevada, orange. It hasn't turned red. It's not totally based on... You mean to tell me that it is balmy and hot in Washington State right now? Really? I don't think so. Stop blaming the weather. It's really basic stuff that any doctor can tell you about. But people just want to make up little fairy tale stories to make themselves feel better when they can't handle the truth. Or when they hate the people that are successful. Like people screeching about Governor Lamont when Connecticut is the last New England state to not turn red. Hang in there, New Jersey. Don't know how long it's going to last, though, because where the virus is making grounds, Connecticut now has the highest infection rate in the continental U.S., followed by Massachusetts. So, virus is making the most progress in southern New England right now. We'll see how far it gets. Oh, but look at all those vaccinations. How long ago were they? See what I mean? There's always one thing. The best thing you can do in situations like this is do what's best for you. Mask, social distance, pick your friends wisely. If somebody that you associate with outs themselves as being one of the crazies, get away from them. Stop associating with them. Always be busy when they call, or when they text you. Because really, this is a character check as much as anything else. If you want to listen to people who are going to lie to you to try and sell you stuff like, hey, here's my ivermectin thingy, take this instead. Snake oil. If there's going to be people out there pulling this crap, you got to know how to deal with it. It's that simple. I'm just glad we've closed a lot of the remaining issues with vaccination that existed. Like, for example, nothing available for the kids. So when everybody has the tools, it comes down to a matter of personal responsibility. Whose side are you on? If you're not with us, you're with the virus. That sounds polarizing and balkanizing. That's what he said with the war on terror. George W. Bush, if you're not with us, you're with the terrorists. Might be a little too simple-minded a thinking, but considering that this thing is as contagious as heck and its follow-up is supposedly going to be even more contagious, we got to see what the experts come up with on that one. Oh, and by the way, speaking of fishing for excuses, how about we talk about, oh, look, they got something new to freak out about right in time for Christmas. See, it's a control mechanism. Post hoc, ergo propter hoc. Just because one thing happens after another doesn't mean that one thing happened because of the other. When it comes to this nonsense, the hat says it all. Yep. Bah humbug. Simple enough. Nice to have this thing dug out on day one of the holiday humbug season. Yeah. But that's where we stand on all of this. A lot has happened since the last time we had one of these little rants. And I imagine a lot more will happen afterwards. But again, consider, what side of history do you want to be on here? Do you want to be on the side of history where you just, have a little more arm soreness to get up to speed on fighting this thing? Or do you want to cross your fingers and hope you don't get it? That's the thing. Fundamentally, there's a reason why vaccination was invented and why it has become such a wonderful thing that has improved a lot of people's lives over the past 100 years. You don't have to go back very far to see you can just look at what life was like in 2020 to get a little preview of what our ancestors had to deal with before this became as established of a thing as it is today. My grandfather, born in the 1920s, grew up in the Great Depression. World War II generation, fought for the U.S. during World War II. Great guy. Had a sibling die in childhood because of a preventable illness that we can vaccinate against nowadays. You don't have to go back that far to see the bad old days. But when you get far enough away from the bad old days that people are snooty and selfish and they don't realize they don't appreciate the progress we've made, they start longing for the bad old days. They just don't know it. But yeah, what side of history do you want to be on? Do you want to be on the side where, oh, look, new variant. All right, time for another mRNA thing. Use this to blunt its ability to hurt you. We'll keep searching ferociously for new technology to deal with anything else that comes down the pike. Or do you want to just cross your fingers? You want to cross your fingers and be a sitting duck. That's what it's boiled down to these days. And if anybody wants to unsubscribe from my channel because I took this side in this whole mess, go right ahead. You really got to think about yourself there, buddy. You came to a tech guy's channel. mRNA is a form of technology. Biotech to fight stuff like this is a form of technology. Why would anybody think that a tech nerd like myself would hate technology like that? Why? Tick tock, tick tock, tick tock. You can't use that analogy anymore. People think you're talking about the video platform. Anyways, I did not want this chat stream to be the number one thing on the channel today, so we're going to get on to some gaming stuff. But yeah, get vaccinated, get boosted, and pay attention to the technology as it develops to continue fighting this thing. And President Biden, and mRNA companies, license out your technology so the developing world stops being a petri dish for the next major variant that renders your existing products obsolete. I think that should get the point across. Stay safe this holiday season, because with all of the crap that's involved now, it's going to be a doozy. Whatever. Till next time, this is MultimediaJay signing off. Thanks for stopping by.